bejeweled crown, which isn't exactly what you'd think a car like this would be named. It's so silly. It sounds like a Borderlands weapon. But you have to remember, Dodge wanted to give off a mental image of superiority every time the name was uttered. Oh, you have a Coronet? Then by all means, take my wife to Brown University. Of course, the name took on a different meaning over the successive generations. The Coronet was the top trim line upon its release, but it became the lowest trim by 1955, even as the Hemi-powered Coronet was setting land speed records at the Bonneville Salt Flats. While it was initially presented as a sort of boutique-type car, the Coronet became an emblem of the changing automotive landscape. Dodge engineers were using higher CFM carburetors to boost horsepower, or slapping those 3 Holley 2-barrels onto an Edelbrock manifold and calling it the six-pack. 6 total holes with the jets and the fuel and the spray and everything. This was a car that allowed Dodge to flex its engineering muscle at the arguable height of the muscle car era. When it first rolled off the factory line, the Coronet had a flathead 6-cylinder engine that made around 100 horsepower at a staggering 3,600 RPM. But this isn't that model. This is the 1967 model, which was the first Dodge to use the RT, which stands for Road and Track, badging. Needless to say, this particular Coronet has had a lot done to it. So deep breath, we're going to be throwing out a list longer than Tyrone's dick.
Long dick style.
This 440 block is new, so what we're going to be talking about is everything in and around it. It's got sourced aluminum heads, forged pistons, 10.5 to 1 compression, Mr. 6-pack cam lifters, ARP bolts, Edelbrock 800 CFM carburetor, an HP manifold, 2.5-inch complete TTI exhaust with an X-pipe, brand new interior, new gas tank, a double roller timing chain, an MSD6 ignition, 1-inch core aluminum radiator, and it's also got a pusher fan in the front as well as the mechanical fan behind it, and a rebuilt 727 3-speed automatic transmission with 323 rear gearing. No overdrive. This Coronet has a wide stance, big wheels, and a hood scoop that does nothing. Got a hood scoop that goes nowhere. It doesn't even go in. It's just painted black to make it look like it goes somewhere. America. But it looks mad as hell, like a car that comes to life at midnight and runs over everyone to whom you have to pay alimony. Dodge Coronet. For that one cousin who always wants to go Dukes of Hazzard Day at the local track. And this is the same cousin who has to jump off the hotel balcony and into the pool. We need to talk about the ridiculousness of the 440 engine, and to understand it, you have to understand that during the muscle car era, engine displacement was just getting larger and larger, like to comic book levels. That's why muscle cars are revered so much, like 60s muscle cars are revered so much today, because we would never do this sort of thing before, except in some very rare, like Dodge Challenger sort of way, but even then, it wasn't a thing that everybody did. Okay, this all starts with the Mustang 289 V8 in the first generation Mustang. That's 4.71 liters. And then Ford made it larger into the ubiquitous 302, which is 4.948 liters. It's close enough that they call it the 5.0. Then Chevy comes back with the Chevy 327 V8. These are all V8s, which is 5.35 liters. And then Chevy's long-lived 350, which is 5.73 liters. Then Ford comes back with the 351, which is 5.75 liters. Now Mopar, Chrysler, enters the picture with the 360. That's 5.899 liters. Chevy has their big block 427. That's 6.997 liters. And now we have the Mopar 440, which is 7.21 liters. See, the late 60s were to engine displacement what the early 2000s were to boost. More, bigger, bigger numbers, bigger 440. You've heard that name echoed before. It's got a cop motor, a 440 cubic inch plant. Yeah, from Blues Brothers. Same engine, 440. Lots of Fs. They know what they're doing when they create engine displacements. 440, the fucking. Okay. Automatic transmission. Yeah. Look, when you're talking about an engine block where each piston displaces 901 cubic centimeters, torque converters are your friends. And even then you still have to be careful. Too much throttle from a standstill and...
Oh, shit.
What's it like to drive? Entertaining. Wind comes in because the doors don't line up with the body, and wind comes in between the glass because the rear passenger windows and the front passenger windows don't line up because there is no pillar between them. But that means you can roll all the windows down and get this big unbroken hole. This Coronet came with optional power steering, which was a so fancy feature because if you had power steering in the 60s, you were showing off big time. Look at me and my one finger around the steering wheel. It's like driving a 90s racing arcade game. There's no feedback at all. No road feel. It doesn't even feel like the steering shaft is hooked up to anything. So when you take a sharp turn, you turn the wheel more than necessary and then the body leans over like this. I mean, today, power steering is adaptable. You know, when you're at a standstill or moving around a parking lot, you have more power. It's more boosted because you need to push those wheels against pavement that isn't moving by. And then when you're on the highway, it backs off the power steering, so you do get more road feel. Back in the 60s, power steerings had a fixed boost level. And most of the time, they were cranked up as high as they could go. So you hardly had to, and that's the weird thing with this much power steering out on the highway. And for that reason, the Vagabond Falcon doesn't have power steering, one for like legitimacy purposes, but also like the floating thing is amplified because you're constantly putting steering input, keeping this car straight on the highway because you don't know if the road is pushing you or the wind is pushing you or it's the slightest movements. It's nuts. And this is supposed to be a sporting car. Oh yeah. Remember how I said there was no overdrive? Well, you feel that. Look at that. 3,000 RPM on the highway at 65 miles an hour. This gigantic 7-liter engine is turning 3,000 RPM. I can hear the gas gauge moving. What a Coronet is for light-to-light warriors. It'll go on the highway, yeah. I mean, even the owner says, I need gear vendors in this or something. Finger banging is like playing Operation without the tweezers. But the Dodge Coronet makes it a joy to waste gas. It's virility. It's a hard-charging youth. Everything's for the night. Forget about tomorrow because it doesn't come. There is only now. There is only... And for that reason, the Coronet was a baby boomer's connection to manhood, because this model peaked right when baby boomers were owning their first cars, buying their first houses, and bearing their first crotch fruit. They were at that age where you first start to dread the arrival of the male. It made sense that this is a car that would be deeply embedded with boomer memory. It's a car from an age where appearances truly started to matter in car culture. In a way, it's the difference between the greatest generation and the baby boomer generation. One was a simple, less materialistic generation of Americans, and the other was the generation that began the rapid decline toward widespread consumerism. We're kind of slandering our own parents by saying this, but this is a car that lives and breathes on the back of baby boomer glorification. This car sucks. You wouldn't own it, no. This car is more crazy and more useless than the SRT4. I mean, what other modern thing would I compare it to? The Challenger Hellcat, I guess, but that still has an engine management system that knows what it's doing and tries to protect the car if it gets too hot. I mean, the most advanced thing this thing has on here, like for the benefit of the passengers, is its seat belts. And even then, they're just lap belts. All they're going to do is give you a whiplash. But it's when appearances began to matter. Cars have always been social signifiers, but this was the era where car ownership was skyrocketing and car culture was developing into its own living, breathing entity, capable of glorification and harsh judgment. Is this the baby boomers' fault? Honestly, not really. It was simply the way the wind was blowing. The 60s were a turbulent time. Even more so than now, right? People say the 20-teens are bad. I mean, we weren't around for the 60s. Just watch Dan Carlin's Hardcore History and he talks about what the 60s really were. So maybe it's right that this car represented live for the now because tomorrow may never come. I mean, the 60s shaped its people in turbulent ways, for better or for worse. And it's also shaped the car culture as we know it today. So here you go. Fight the night with a 440 because tomorrow may be futile.